Have you ever had a moment, a fleeting second, when something so utterly trivial, so insignificant, shifts the very axis of your world? Not a grand catastrophe, not a seismic revelation, but something as mundane, as utterly unremarkable, as a single misplaced phone call. It's a concept that seems almost laughable, isn't it? The idea that destiny, that the intricate, sprawling tapestry of human lives, could hinge upon a simple misdial, a voice meant for another ear, a connection that never should have been made. Yet, sometimes, in the quiet, unassuming corners of our existence, the universe conspires in the most astonishing ways, pulling at threads we didn't even know were tangled. Imagine, if you will, the hum of a mundane Tuesday afternoon in a quiet, sun-drenched suburban home in Scottsdale, Arizona. The kind of day where the most exciting event might be the mail delivery, or perhaps a particularly robust bloom on a desert rose. This was the backdrop for Arthur Maxwell, a man in his late 50s with a comfortable, unassuming life. Arthur wasn't a man of grand adventures or dramatic pronouncements. His days were structured, predictable, and frankly, he liked them that way. He'd built a successful, if somewhat niche, business in antique clock restoration, a painstaking, meticulous craft that suited his calm, methodical nature. His hands, gnarled and wise, could breathe life back into timepieces that had long fallen silent, their intricate gears and springs a puzzle he delighted in solving. He was a creature of habit, and those habits included a midday cup of Earl Grey, a quiet read of the financial news, and a brief, almost ritualistic check of his voicemail. It was during this routine, this utterly unremarkable moment, that the first tremor in his carefully constructed world began. The phone, a simple cordless model, vibrated gently in his hand. One new message. He pressed play, expecting the usual, a client inquiry about a grandfather clock, perhaps a call from his golf buddy canceling their weekly game. But what spilled from the tiny speaker was not what he anticipated. It was a man's voice, raspy with emotion, laced with an accent Arthur couldn't quite place, but distinctly not American. The words were a torrent, tumbling out in a language he vaguely recognized as Eastern European, full of a raw, desperate urgency. Arthur frowned, pulling the phone away from his ear, checking the number displayed. It was his, definitely his. He pressed play again, listening more intently this time, trying to decipher the cadence, the tone, even if the words themselves were gibberish to him. The voice was pleading, desperate, almost sobbing. There were words repeated, brother, mother, and then, chillingly, danger. Arthur felt a prickle of unease. This was no wrong number meant for a local acquaintance. This was something far more profound, far more unsettling. He listened to the entire message, which seemed to stretch on for an eternity, despite being only a minute or so long. The caller's anguish was palpable, a heavy weight that settled in the quiet room. When the message ended, a deafening silence followed. Arthur sat there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his tea growing cold, the financial news unread. He replayed the message a third time, then a fourth. It was clear this wasn't just a misdial. It was a desperate cry for help, a message intended for someone who might hold the key to another's salvation. But who, and why was it directed to him? He considered simply deleting it, chalking it up to a bizarre anomaly, a glitch in the vast, interconnected web of modern communication. But something held him back. The sheer raw emotion in that voice, the way it had pierced through the mundane fabric of his afternoon, resonated with a forgotten chord deep within him. Arthur had always been a man who valued order and logic, but there was an undeniable, almost magnetic pull to this stranger's plea. Felt important, more than important. It felt like a crossroads, a subtle whisper from the universe hinting at something far larger than his quiet life. He had no brothers, no immediate family left, save for a distant cousin he hadn't seen in decades. His parents had passed away years ago, a quiet, dignified exit from the world. His life was, by all accounts, a solitary, peaceful existence. Yet, this voice, this desperate voice, spoke of a brother, of a mother, of peril. A strange, almost morbid curiosity began to unfurl within him. What if this wasn't just a random error? What if, by some unfathomable twist of fate, this message was meant to find him? The thought was absurd, of course. He was a clock restorer, not a detective, not a humanitarian aid worker. But the image of that desperate man, wherever he was, whatever plight he faced, haunted him. He found himself pacing his living room, a rare deviation from his usual stillness. The sun, which moments ago had felt warm and comforting, now seemed to cast long, unsettling shadows. He tried to rationalize it away, to dismiss it as a momentary lapse of sanity, a peculiar quirk of the digital age. But the words, the emotional weight of them, clung to him. He decided, against his better judgment, to do something about it. Not much, just a small, almost insignificant step. He pulled out his laptop, a relic of an earlier technological era, but perfectly functional. He typed in the phone number that had called him, a long string of digits that stretched across the screen. No immediate results. No name, no address, just the country code, Poland. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Poland, a country so far away, so removed from his serene Arizona existence. This wasn't some local prank call. This was real. The desperation was real. He felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of responsibility, a heavy cloak settling on his shoulders. He didn't know why or how, but he knew he couldn't simply ignore it. The world, he mused, was full of inexplicable connections, invisible threads that bound people together in ways they could never comprehend. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had stumbled upon one such thread. And the thought, while terrifying, was also undeniably, thrillingly compelling. He spent the rest of the afternoon, not restoring delicate mechanisms, but poring over online maps of Poland, trying to piece together fragments of information from the call. The accent, the faint sounds in the background he thought he'd heard. Something like church bells, distant traffic. It was a futile exercise, a desperate attempt to grasp at straws in an ocean of uncertainty. But he couldn't stop. The mystery had taken root, a tenacious vine winding its way around his meticulously ordered mind. He found himself wondering about this brother, this mother, about the danger that loomed. Was it political, criminal, a personal tragedy? The possibilities swirled, each more unsettling than the last. He felt like an unwitting participant in a drama he didn't understand, a play he hadn't auditioned for, yet found himself standing center stage. The quiet hum of his home, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to amplify the silence, making the unknown even more profound. And with each passing minute, Arthur Maxwell, the unassuming clock restorer, was drawn deeper into a labyrinth he never knew existed. His predictable world was fracturing, not with a bang, but with the soft, persistent ring of a phone call meant for someone else. The following days for Arthur blurred into a strange, obsessive quest. His antique clock workshop, usually a haven of focused precision, became a backdrop to his digital delving. The scent of aged wood and fine oils mingled with the faint hum of his laptop as he navigated through obscure online forums, historical archives, and even language learning sites, desperately trying to glean some understanding from that haunting voicemail. He used rudimentary translation tools, feeding snippets of the Polish words he thought he'd recognized, only to be met with fragmented, often nonsensical results. It was like trying to assemble a mosaic with half the pieces missing and no picture to guide him. Yet he persisted. The face of the desperate man, the one whose voice had etched itself into Arthur's memory, remained a blurry phantom, yet his plea was as clear as day. He even tried calling the number back, several times. Each time it went straight to voicemail, a different message this time, in a rapid-fire Polish that offered no clues. He left a hesitant message himself, a stumbling, fumbling attempt in English, explaining that he had received a call meant for someone else, that he wanted to help. He felt foolish, naive, talking into the void, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt like a betrayal of some unspoken trust. This was an individual in profound distress, and Arthur, by some cosmic accident, had become an unwilling witness to their pain. One evening, staring at a blank document on his screen, exhausted but unable to rest, He considered the possibility that the number was simply old, reassigned. But the raw emotion in the voice, the specificity of brother and mother, it felt too real, too urgent to be a random recycled number. He had to assume it was a direct, albeit misdirected, call to a living person. But who? And why? He pondered the sheer unlikelihood of it all. What were the odds, truly, that a random misdial across continents would land on his specific phone, in his specific quiet corner of the world? It defied logic, probability, everything he understood about how the universe operated. And yet, here it was. His routine, once a comforting anchor, began to fray at the edges. Meals were forgotten. Sleep was restless, filled with echoes of that foreign voice. His friends, noticing his distraction, gently inquired. He mumbled vague explanations about a complex clock restoration, something demanding his full attention. He couldn't bring himself to explain the bizarre truth, the preposterous notion that he, Arthur Maxwell, was on an unwitting quest spurred by a stranger's desperate plea. They wouldn't understand. They might even think he was losing his mind. Then, one quiet morning, while sipping his Earl Grey, an idea, a desperate, long-shot idea, sparked in his mind. What if the misdial wasn't entirely random? What if it was just one digit off? It was a needle in a haystack, he knew, but it was a concrete step, something he could do. He began systematically trying numbers similar to the one that had called him, painstakingly changing one digit at a time, then two. It was painstaking work, a slow crawl through a numerical maze. He called dozens of numbers, mostly resulting in automated messages, bewildered strangers, or disconnected lines. His phone bill, he knew, would be astronomical, but at this point he didn't care. The cost was trivial compared to the gnawing sense of unresolved urgency. He tried altering the last digit, then the second to last, then the third to last. Felt like an endless, fruitless task. Just as despair began to settle in, a heavy blanket of futility, something shifted. He had just dialed a number where the very last digit was different from the original. A ring, then another, and then a click. A voice. It was a man, speaking English, but with an unmistakable Eastern European lilt, the same accent he now recognized from the voicemail. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Hello?" the voice said, a hint of impatience in his tone. Arthur's voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper. "My name is Arthur Maxwell. I received a phone call, a message." It was a cry for help. It was in Polish, and it spoke of a brother, a mother, and danger. There was a long silence on the other end, so profound that Arthur thought the call had been disconnected. He could hear his own ragged breath in the quiet of his study. Then, the voice returned, softer now, laced with a tremor that was almost a sob. "My brother, Janek? Is that you?" "I don't know," Arthur stammered, his mind reeling. "I don't know Janek. I don't know your family. But I received a message, a desperate message, and I felt I had to try and find out who it was meant for." Another silence, longer this time. Arthur could almost feel the weight of the man's processing on the other end. The shock, the confusion, the dawning, unbelievable hope. "My name is Marek," the voice finally said, haltingly. "Marek Kowalski. I have a brother, Janek. He's in Poland. We lost touch many years ago, after a terrible family tragedy." The words were heavy, each one laden with untold sorrow. He usually calls me on this number, but I changed my number recently, just last month. I haven't had a chance to tell him. It was an old number that was disconnected, I thought. But it seems you have it now." Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The old number, the misdial, the universe indeed had conspired. "Marek?" Arthur said, his voice stronger now, a sense of purpose flooding through him. "Your brother, he was in distress. He spoke of danger. He sounded desperate." Marek took a sharp, ragged breath. "Oh my God, Janek, I knew something was wrong. I had a feeling, a bad feeling." He usually calls me like clockwork every few months, just to check in. But it's been nearly half a year, and I couldn't reach him on the old numbers. I thought he was just busy, or angry at me. His voice cracked, raw with guilt and fear. What did he say exactly? Can you tell me everything? And so, in that quiet Scottsdale home, a bridge was built across continents, forged by a simple misdial and the unwavering empathy of a man who refused to look away. Arthur recounted every detail he could recall from the voicemail, the tone, the urgency, the faint sounds in the background. Marek listened intently, interjecting with gasps and choked sobs, piecing together the terrifying puzzle of his lost brother's plea. The story that began to unfold, whispered across thousands of miles, was one of profound loss, unimaginable hardship, and a danger that now seemed to loom larger than ever before. It was a story that would bind these two strangers, Arthur and Marek, in a way neither of them could have ever predicted. The clock was ticking, not on an antique timepiece, but on a human life, and Arthur, the unassuming restorer, had become its reluctant, yet determined, timekeeper. The connection between Arthur and Marek, forged in the crucible of a desperate misdial, deepened with each passing hour. Marek, a landscape architect living in a bustling suburb of Chicago, found himself sharing the raw, fractured history of his family with a complete stranger. It was a testament to the sheer desperation in Janek's voice and Arthur's unwavering commitment that such intimacy could blossom so quickly. Marek's family, the Kowalskis, had been torn apart by the brutal realities of post-Soviet Poland, a time when economic upheaval and social unrest had fractured countless lives. Janek, the elder brother, had always been the fiery one, the dreamer, the one who believed in grand ideas and, often, grand risks. Marek, younger by 5 years, was the pragmatic, grounded counterpart. Their parents, strong but weary, had struggled to keep their small farm afloat. Then the tragedy. Not a single dramatic event, but a slow, agonizing unraveling. Their mother had fallen ill with a rare, aggressive disease. The medical costs were astronomical, far beyond their humble means. Janek, in a desperate attempt to secure funds, had become involved in increasingly shady dealings, falling in with unsavory characters in the burgeoning black markets. Marek had pleaded with him, warned him of the dangers, but Janek, blinded by the love for their dying mother and a burning sense of responsibility, had pressed on. The inevitable happened. Janek was caught in a massive police crackdown on organized crime. He wasn't the mastermind, Marek insisted, but a pawn, a desperate young man trying to save his family. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Their mother passed away shortly after Janek's incarceration, her last days filled with the agonizing knowledge of her son's fate. Their father, a man broken by loss, had retreated into himself, dying a few years later, his spirit extinguished. Marek, alone and heartbroken, had tried to visit Janek in prison, but the visits were short, strained, filled with a suffocating mix of guilt and unspoken accusations. Janek, hardened by his time inside, had become withdrawn, bitter. He eventually immigrated to the U.S. seeking a new start, leaving behind the painful memories, and, in a way, leaving Janek behind too. The phone calls, irregular at first, then more sporadic, had become their only tenuous link. A fragile thread now snapped. "He blamed me, you know," Marek confided, his voice thick with emotion, the words tumbling out as if released from a dam. "He said I should have done more, that I didn't fight hard enough for him. Maybe he was right. I don't know. I was so young, so scared." Arthur listened, a silent, empathic presence on the other end of the line. He imagined the vast chasm that had opened between these two brothers, a chasm not of distance, but of unspoken pain and misunderstanding. "But he still called," Marek continued, his voice regaining a desperate hope. "He still called. He didn't forget me. And now this. Danger. My God, Arthur, what could it be?" Arthur, with his methodical mind, began to piece together a strategy. He realized that Marek, despite his emotional distress, was the key. He had the personal connection, the deep understanding of Janek's character and their shared past. Arthur, the detached observer, could bring the logic, the calmness, the practical steps. They were an unlikely team, the meticulous clock restorer and the grieving landscape architect, united by a voice across the ocean. They decided that Marek would have to travel to Poland. It was a huge undertaking financially and emotionally, but there was no other choice. Janek was in trouble, and they were his only hope. "I'll need to access his old apartment, his belongings," Marek explained, his voice gaining a determined edge. "See if he left any clues, any contacts." He spoke of old friends, distant relatives who might know something. It was a perilous journey into a past he had desperately tried to bury. He booked the first available flight, a whirlwind decision driven by a primal fear for his brother's safety. Arthur, meanwhile, pledged to do everything he could from his end, researching Polish law, finding contacts for private investigators, anything that might assist Marek once he landed. He found himself spending hours in online forums dedicated to missing persons, to international crime, absorbing information like a sponge. The quiet life of antique clock restoration now seemed incredibly distant, almost irrelevant. His new purpose was clear: help Marek find Janek. The days leading up to Marek's departure were a blur of intense communication between the two men. Phone calls, emails, video chats at odd hours, bridging the time zones. Arthur helped Marek draft lists of questions, prepare for potential scenarios, even find a reputable Polish-speaking lawyer for an initial consultation. He became Marek's sounding board, his strategic planner, his emotional support. It was an extraordinary bond forged out of an extraordinary circumstance. Arthur, who had always found solace in the predictable ticking of time, now found himself racing against it, propelled by a sense of urgency he had never known. Marek arrived in Warsaw, the sprawling, historic capital of Poland, under a blanket of cold, gray skies. The city, vibrant and resilient, held ghosts for him, echoes of a childhood long past. He felt a profound sense of disorientation, not just from the jet lag, but from the sudden, jarring collision of his present life with a past he had tried to outrun. He checked into a small, nondescript hotel in an older part of the city, the kind of place Janek might have stayed. His first call was to Arthur, reporting his safe arrival. "It feels heavy here, Arthur," Marek whispered into the phone, his voice laced with an almost tangible melancholia. "Like the past is breathing down my neck." His search began the next morning. Janek's old apartment building, a crumbling Soviet-era block, stood defiant against the urban renewal sweeping through parts of the city. The landlord, a stoic, weathered woman with eyes that had seen too much, confirmed Janek had left abruptly months ago, leaving rent unpaid, taking only a small bag of belongings. "He was always a troubled one," she'd muttered, her gaze distant. No forwarding address, no contacts, just the silent, dusty rooms echoing with absence. Marek felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't going to be easy. He spent the next few days canvassing Janek's old haunts, the dingy cafes, the shadowy bars he used to frequent. He spoke to a few former acquaintances, men with guarded eyes and wary expressions. They offered little, vague answers, a shrug of the shoulders, a shake of the head. Janek owed some people money, one man admitted reluctantly, looking over his shoulder. Bad people. He ran into trouble. The words hung in the air, chilling Marek to the bone. This wasn't just a personal crisis. It was something far more sinister, a shadow extending from Janek's past. The danger his brother had spoken of was real, tangible, and now Marek was stepping directly into its path. With each dead end, with each vague warning, the weight of the situation grew heavier, pressing down on him, and on Arthur, thousands of miles away, listening intently to every detail, every chilling revelation. The phone call that had started as a strange anomaly was now pulling them deeper into a dangerous, desperate search for a lost brother, a search for answers that might uncover far more than they bargained for. Marek's journey through Warsaw grew increasingly desperate. Each lead he pursued seemed to splinter into a dozen more questions, each answer shrouded in fear or evasion. He learned that Janek had become deeply entangled with a ruthless debt collection syndicate, a group far more dangerous than common criminals. These weren't just thugs. They were organized, methodical, and had tentacles reaching into every dark corner of the city. The money Janek owed wasn't a small sum, and his sudden disappearance had only amplified the syndicate's fury. Marek heard whispers of violence, of other debtors who had simply vanished. The stakes, he realized with a sickening lurch, were far higher than he had initially imagined. He felt a crushing wave of guilt. If he hadn't left Poland, if he had stayed and fought for Janek, maybe things would have been different. But regret, he knew, was a luxury he couldn't afford now. He had to find his brother. He reported what he'd learned to Arthur, his voice tight with fear. Arthur, back in Scottsdale, listened with a growing sense of dread. He spent sleepless nights researching international crime syndicates, the risks involved, the almost insurmountable odds. He felt a profound helplessness, thousands of miles away, able only to offer advice and moral support. But he continued, relentlessly, to search for any shred of information, any contact that might help. One evening, after another fruitless day, Marek found himself in a rundown bar in a forgotten district, a place Janek used to frequent. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and stale beer. He was about to leave, defeated, when an old man at the bar, his face a roadmap of hard living, caught his eye. He recognized Marek from the old days, a faint flicker of recognition in his weary eyes. "You're Janek's brother, aren't you?" the man rasped, his voice barely audible. Marek nodded, his heart pounding. "He owed them," the man continued, glancing nervously around. "But he found something, a weakness, a ledger, something that could bring them down." Marek leaned in, breathless. "What ledger? Where?" The old man shook his head. "He hid it, said it was his insurance. If anything happened to him, it would surface." He paused, taking a long swig of his drink. "Last I heard, he was trying to get out, to leave Poland for good. He was heading for the border with Ukraine. Said he had a contact there, someone who could help him disappear. The information was a single, fragile thread, but it was something." Marek thanked the man, his mind racing. A ledger, insurance, the Ukrainian border. It was a desperate plan, a high-stakes gamble. He immediately called Arthur, relaying the new information. Arthur, invigorated by the breakthrough, instantly shifted his research. He focused on border crossings, on the treacherous routes, on the risks of dealing with human smugglers. He cautioned Marek, urging extreme care. This was no longer just about debt. It was about exposing a criminal enterprise, a far more dangerous game. Marek, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, made his way to the Ukrainian border, a desolate, heavily patrolled stretch of land. He navigated through the underbelly of border towns, asking around, showing a faded photograph of Janek. The journey was fraught with peril, a constant awareness of eyes watching, of the looming threat of the syndicate. He bribed his way through checkpoints, faced down suspicious characters, all while keeping Arthur updated through encrypted messages, a lifeline across the ocean. Finally, in a small, remote village near the border, he found him. Not in a bustling town, not at a formal crossing, but hidden away, in a secluded cabin, recovering from a brutal beating. Janek, thinner, his face etched with hardship, a haunted look in his eyes, but undeniably, irrevocably Janek. He was barely clinging to life, the wounds of his ordeal fresh. He had been trying to cross the border, ledger in hand, when he was intercepted by the syndicate's enforcers. They had beaten him, tortured him, desperate to find the ledger. But Janek, with a strength born of desperation, had clung to it, had hidden it, and had somehow, miraculously, escaped, stumbling through the wilderness until he collapsed at the cabin of a kind, elderly woman who had taken him in. The reunion was raw, emotional, a torrent of tears and choked words. Marek held his brother, feeling the years of unspoken pain and regret wash away. Janek, weak but alive, handed him a battered, blood-stained ledger. It was a meticulous record of the syndicate's illicit activities, a blueprint for their downfall. This was his insurance, the key to his freedom and perhaps the key to bringing justice to countless others. Working with Arthur, who had already contacted the relevant authorities in Poland and through Interpol, Marek helped Janek get the medical attention he desperately needed, and then, slowly, carefully, they began the process of bringing the syndicate down. Janek's testimony, combined with the irrefutable evidence in the ledger, led to a series of arrests that crippled the organization. It was a long, arduous process, filled with danger and legal battles, but they prevailed. Janek, once a prisoner of his past, was finally free, not just from physical confinement, but from the crushing weight of his mistakes. He and Marek, bound by their shared ordeal, began the slow, painful process of rebuilding their brotherly bond. They had lost so much, but they had found each other again, thanks to a phone call, a desperate plea, and the unlikely intervention of a quiet man in Scottsdale. Arthur Maxwell, back in his peaceful workshop, continued to restore antique clocks. But now, his days were infused with a different kind of satisfaction. He received occasional calls from Marek and Janek, updates on their lives, stories of their slow healing. He wasn't a hero, he insisted, just a man who answered a call. But for two lost brothers, separated by decades of pain and miles of land, he was nothing short of a miracle. And that, my friends, is a story that proves the most extraordinary connections can emerge from the most unexpected places. It reminds us that empathy, that simply choosing to listen when others might turn away, can weave threads of hope across the vast distances of the world. It's a testament to the fact that even a simple misdial, a voice meant for someone else, can become the catalyst for an incredible journey of reunion, redemption, and a connection that transcends all boundaries. If the story resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of wonder or moved you in some way, I encourage you to hit that like button. It helps us share these incredible true stories with more people who might need to hear them. And if you want to stay connected, to be part of our community where we explore the hidden threads that connect us all, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another captivating tale. Thank you for listening, for joining us on this journey into the profound and often mysterious tapestry of human experience. Until next time, keep your ears open and your hearts even more so.